perspective. Moazzam Begg is the outreach director of CAGE. That's an independent advocacy organization working to empower communities impacted by the war on terror. He's also a former Guantanamo prisoner. Moazzam joins us now from Birmingham in the UK. Moazzam, thank you very much for joining us here on the NewsHour. When I look at sort of what's been happening, transpiring in the last 24 hours, Western media has a tendency to sort of drive their own narrative, and oftentimes they tend to overlook sort of like the larger picture. I was just taking a look at your Twitter feed, and shortly after the announcement, you said that the majority of Daesh victims weren't from countries like the US, UK, or France, that they were Muslims from Syria. They were Muslims from Iraq. How do you think it's going to be perceived in these lands?
Well, I've already spoken to some friends who are in Syria. I was in Syria in 2012 and 13 myself, and lived in an area not too far away from Barisha, which was the place where Baghdadi was killed. And what I know from speaking to the Syrians in that area, in the Idlib area, is that this is actually the person that was killed is the one who led the organization that broke the back of the Syrian revolution. Prior to that, nobody really cared about ISIS or ISI as it was in Iraq. And they were focused on the regime, on Bashar al-Assad, on the barrel bombs, on the use of chlorine and sarin gas against innocent civilians, against the issue of using starvation as a weapon of war, the tens of thousands of men and women who were imprisoned and tortured in various prisons, like the one in Tadmor in East Syria, where 11,000 people were supposed to have been executed, according to a report by Amnesty International. So, of course, that is the focus of the majority of people in the free regions, in the liberated regions, in Idlib in Syria. They haven't been concerned about Baghdadi so much as the rest of the world has been. And remember, if Baghdadi's organization killed 30 Britons, 10 Americans, 100 French, they killed tens of thousands of Syrians. And I mean, the Syrian government killed hundreds of thousands of Syrians, for which there's still been no sense of redress or saving these individuals in this area. And it is now the last bastion of the region where people are defending themselves against a brutal regime that is slowly but surely incurring its position on the Idlib regions. And there needs to be some kind of stop to this. Otherwise, I think there'll be the next massacre will happen, just as it did in Aleppo, and the world will sit and watch, as you've seen in you're showing in your images right now.
Okay, I'm going to play the devil's advocate here. Going back to sort of Sunday's speech that was given by the U.S. president, he said about Baghdadi, quote, he was whimpering, he was crying, he was screaming all the way to a dead-end tunnel. From President Trump's perspective, this could be seen as a way to sort of delegitimize not only Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, but also the terror organization. But do you think this could have a reverse effect in some people's eyes?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to question what Trump says. How do we know that he knows this? How did, from what I know, they were using thermal imaging devices which don't relay sound to actually follow through the movement of Baghdadi. The more disturbing part, I think, is that when he says that he was killed, he was with his children and he was whimpering. If he was whimpering, do we know, was it the sound of him whimpering? Perhaps was it his children whimpering? And is that the same thing? And do we celebrate the idea that children are killed in this manner? I think we need to ask this question. The other thing is that I'm the last person to have any sympathy for Baghdadi, as most Muslims don't. But there is this question, of course, that we celebrate people's death in this way. They did it with bin Laden, they did it with when Saddam Hussein was captured, and they're almost delivered as trophy-like stories to the rest of the world. And I don't know if we've become so macabre that celebrating this kind of death. Remember, ISIS used to celebrate death, didn't it? They used to film people, videotape them being executed and beheaded. So now we're told that soon perhaps we might be seeing these video images of these people being killed, and somehow that is just that type of graphic imagery of death is justified, but ISIS isn't. I think they're both just as bad, to be honest.
But I think you would agree that the way that President Obama had delivered the news of Osama bin Laden's death is somewhat very different to how President Trump delivered the announcement that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi died.
That's interesting. Of course, Trump has his own very Trumpian style. He does things. He's a maverick. He tweets things out, whereas Obama never would have done so. But the principle is the same, and it's this kind of trophyizing your victims. And it's something that the United States used to do before in the past. They did it with Geronimo when they captured him, when the Native Americans were fighting for their liberation and for their freedom. They did it. So capturing people, leaders of enemy organizations, and then trumpeting their capture and then talking about it in a way that boosts your polls is something that most U.S. presidents have done, from President Bush to Obama to Trump, and I think Trump is no different in this regard. If they really had wanted to kill him and take him out and not make a story out of it, they could have done that too. They would have eliminated him. The organization would have been headless. The countries around almost are completely united in their opposition to ISIS, and yet the need to put this out and to make to talk about it, to champion that I have killed the leader of ISIS and I am the one responsible for it. Simply, to me, this sounds something that's not befitting of a world leader.
Mm-hmm. All right, Moazzam Begg, thank you very much for joining us here on the NewsHour. I do appreciate your analysis.